Carleton with the Association of Migraine Disorders. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Molly. It's my pleasure. Absolutely.
Glad to have you here. So the Association of Migraine Disorders is participating in Brain Week RI, which is kicking off next week. So Jim's going to talk us through today a little bit about some of the participation programs, events that the Association of Migraine Disorders will have happening. But let's start off first about a little bit about the organization that's based here in Rhode Island.
Sure. The organization was incorporated here in Rhode Island as a nonprofit, and that's when I came on board. I met Dr. Godley, who's the president, and we also have a vice president down in Wilmington, Delaware, Dr. Michael Tiscito. These were two ear, nose, and throat doctors, otolaryngologists, who were just seeing so much migraine disease. They came to the conclusion that there's more to it than it's just a headache. It's actually a full-fledged neurological disorder that needs a lot of attention and research.
And there's a lot of stigma around migraine. I'll try not to be too biased here. As a migrainer myself, we'll try to keep it, but whatever. People already know that about me. But let's talk a little bit about the need for awareness and attention to be brought to migraine.
Sure. I mean, you mentioned the word stigma, and I can scarcely think of any disease that that is more, at least as or more stigmatized than migraine. Something happened around the time of Victorian England where something that was recognized as a legitimate malady before that all of a sudden became something that was interpreted as malingering. And that's around the time that it happened, and people have researched it historically, and it's actually quite interesting. I mean, there's been so many famous people that have been migraineurs, that are, actually wed into the fabric of our culture. We don't even know that, and the way it's changed their lives and changed our perception of them.
Yeah, it's really fascinating and amazing how you can connect with people. Let's talk a little bit about some of the events, and then we can get more into the organization and then bringing up awareness. So there are some, and I don't have it in these notes right here. So let's talk about some of the events that are happening based through with the Association of Migraine Disorder coming up for Brain Week RI. Brain Week RI, this is the second year that it's happening here in Rhode Island. It's super cool. Bringing together so many different experts, talking about just different diseases that are happening within the brain, different kinds of stuff. It's really cool. But let's talk about this stuff focusing on migraine. So talk to me about what's happening going on this week.
Okay, this week, migraine, we have a robust participation in Brain Week, and it gives us a chance to do a couple of very important things. We're sponsoring the screening of a award-winning movie about migraine called Out of My Head that just recently premiered at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's an award-winning filmmaker. Her daughter was suffering from migraines, and she tried to learn something about it, learn something about the illness, because she was cast in the role of a caretaker, and she really went down the rabbit hole that so many other people have gone down. It's like, what is this? It seems to be so, endemic, 36 million people. So we're going to do two showings of Out of My Head, and if you don't mind me referring to my notes.
No problem.
Okay. One will be at Friday, March 16th at the George Auditorium at Rhode Island Hospital, and the second will be Sunday, March 18th from 4 to 6 at the auditorium on 95 Cushing Street at Brown University. It's really a wonderful film. I saw it in DC a few weeks ago when we were participating in the Headache on the Hill and the Stop Pain Initiative, and basically going around to our congressional delegation in Rhode Island and trying to get them to support this bill that has a lot of migraine research wedded into it, looking for not a cure would be great, but something that could abort it, something that could better treat it. We haven't had a new medication since the 90s. Nothing new, okay? But we're right on the cusp of some really, really interesting things. And hopefully, a lot of that will come out in Out of My Head. It's an enlightening experience to do it.
When you were there at this screening and you were in DC working on legislation, were policymakers there for the screening, or do you know if policymakers were paying attention to this?
Well, they were absolutely paying attention to it.
Yeah.
As far as the screening goes, I can't actually say that that they were there. I mean, we did get a chance to meet with a couple legislators, and we certainly met with their staffs. Their staffs were very interested and very engaged. And I mean, the result is, we had well over 100 people doing this on the Hill in one day, and the number of people co-signing that bill now is just skyrocketed. So hopefully it's going to happen. Free up some money to do some research to help help learn a little bit more about this absolutely baffling disease.
Well, and I think that's what's so interesting is that whether you suffer or not from migraine disorder, migraine disease, what's so interesting about it is that it doesn't just impact you who is afflicted with this. It impacts so many other people, because whether or not you're in this relationship, so your immediate family, but then it impacts, there's so many just different ways to look at it, and I think that's what the film kind of does, right, is it takes a look at not only the personal relationships, but the economic relationships as well, and the economic impact, because when you're suffered, you have to take time out of work, you're taking time away from your family. I mean, it really is, there's a very large effect of this disease, and so it is fascinating. If you know someone who's affected by migraine, you can maybe try to understand. Mm-hmm. And so being able to, whether it's through a film, through discussions, having some type of money to free up research, could be really rewarding.
Absolutely. And the thing, one of the things about migraine that's interesting is people think that, erroneously, that it's just a headache, when you can actually be a migraine sufferer and not have a headache.
Yeah.
You can have vertigo. And migraine is bad enough, but vertigo, the way it accompanies this neurological disease, I mean, it just shatters your life. Your world gets very small, very fast. And it just doesn't go away. And hopefully, like I said, we're close to finding some medications that can ameliorate that. But until then, there's just a whole lot of people that have this illness, and they need to be mobilized.
Yeah, it's very true. And the people who are, like you mentioned, in that caretaker role, or the people that, the economic impact, I think is fascinating.
It's staggering.
It is absolutely fascinating, because when you have to take out work, or you are not able to work, it is quite alarming. So being able to do whatever research, and whether it's medication, whatever it is, treatment, people out there, should we be hopeful?
Absolutely. I mean, we're, like I said, we're right on the cusp of some very, very interesting research. They're in the end of clinical trials without going into, a whole mouthful of alphabet soup. They're called CGRP antibodies, monoclonal antibodies. And by lowering this substance in the brain, by fighting it, where they're getting absolutely wonderful results for stopping migraines dead in their tracks.
That's always a good note. Okay, so we do have the film that will be happening, 2 free screenings, which I always think is absolutely excellent when you can showcase something that's informational for free. So we have those 2 free showings Friday and Sunday in March. What else do we have going on?
Dr. Godley will be delivering 2 lectures at URI, I believe in the Department of Pharmacy. They free up their building there for Brain Week. We have a display, and he's going to talk about why migraine matters, which is kind of a free-ranging, fascinating lecture that he's given many times before. That helps to inform people on the nature of the disease, and maybe in some cases, show some support for the caretakers, like you said, because really when you start figuring it like that, you get the migraine sufferer, and then you get the family involved. I mean, the algorithm just goes out of control. You're talking about millions upon millions of people that are being affected here.
Yeah, it is fascinating when you look into it. Let's talk about, so that's happening down at URI at the Brain Fair. That's happening as well. And then there's also an advocacy panel for neuroscience that's happening Thursday, March 15th. That's at the East Providence Library. If people are interested in that, what will be happening there?
Well, basically, it's going to be a panel of experts and neurologists, people that are interested and knowledgeable, about about not just migraine, but advocacy for the whole, science of neurology and understanding that, because it's through that understanding, even beyond migraine, that we can begin to take a look at, treating not just migraine, but other neurological disorders like, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and I mean, it's all involved in that study of neurology, and advocating for it, has to be a powerful thing.
Do you think that raising awareness is crucial for advocacy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, because so many people, they just don't understand the disease. They see it as almost like a form of malingering, and people will say, if you have to go on disability or something like that because you're disabled, most people don't want to do that. I would say the vast majority of people do not want to go on disability and get maybe $1,200 a month. That's what the average is. I mean, people want to work, but we have to make reasonable accommodations for people with the illness so they can work. Like, you can't wear fragrance, or maybe lighting has to be accommodated. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to avoid migraine triggers. And a real trigger that's coming just this weekend is the change in time. That is a major trigger.
Brutal.
Yep, because a lot of times it ends up with sleep deprivation, which is one of the top 4 migraine triggers. So I was just tweeting on that earlier today.
So if people are interested in learning more about Brain Week, maybe they're interested in learning more about triggers, what kind of resources do you have at the Association of Migraine Disorder?
Oh, I mean, our website, very robust. We've got a professional library. We've got a library that's more for the layperson, that wide-ranging articles and blogs and things of that nature. We have a history of about 3 years of newsletters. You could take a dive right into our website and learn an awful lot. We've put a lot in print. We've put a lot down. A lot of dedicated time from docs that really are committed to finding an answer to this really puzzling disease.
I like the links that you had to the podcast as well, because it provides multiple different perspectives, which I always think is unique. I know for me, when researching everything, there's so many just different aspects and elements. It's always nice to get different perspectives, especially from the clinical side of things, and then from other sufferers as well.
Sure, I would invite anybody. We have a large library of podcasts that are really interesting, all different subjects. Like I said, you could spend hours upon hours educating yourself. And I would say if you're a sufferer and you're just learning about it now, that would be a great place to start.
It's always interesting too, because everybody's body is different and migraine affects people differently. So what you might experience might be different from what somebody else experiences. And then maybe what someone says, you're like, oh, I have that too. And so you think, you might not know that that's related to migraine. So that's what's so interesting about the disease, right?
Absolutely. It's like it's changeable. It takes so many different permutations. Like it affects you a certain way, somebody else another way. The fact that you can not even get headaches and still have the illness is that always was fascinating to me, like, to get your arms around that. But we would like to begin advocacy groups, almost self-help type arrangements. We're in the beginning stages of that. We're working with a number of different universities on campus to have campus groups.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it's almost like, we're very grassroots that way.
That's great.
And we're trying to grow it as organically as possible. And right now we got a good response out of University of Michigan, and I believe URI is in maybe its second year. So some of these things are taking root.
That's fantastic. And university can definitely be a little stressful, which is
can
be a trigger for some people.
Sure.
Can definitely be a trigger. Before we let you go, Jim, the spring is going to be very active for the organization, with a lot of awareness activities and then fundraiser coming up in May. Can you talk a little bit about some stuff going on this spring?
We have a race, a road race that we hold in North Kingstown in Quonset. That's usually around Mother's Day. That's one of our fundraisers. That's one of our signature fundraisers that we've been doing for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. And then following that, in June is our signature event, which is what we call the Mad Hatter Party, and a lot of speakers, a free panel, and then culminating in a dinner and awards for people in the field just to recognize what they've done.
Fantastic.
It's very, very strong, very robust. Spring is a busy time for us.
Spring is busy. Jim Carleton with the Association of Migraine Disorders, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Appreciate you being able to come down, and hopefully that Brain Week is exciting and fulfilling for you.
Thank you, Molly. I hope so.
I hope so as well. Thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon. We're wrapping up here on GoLocal Live in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. Kate Nagel kicks things off here in just a few moments with all things news and politics in the 4 o'clock hour. I hope you enjoy your weekend. Be safe and have fun.